Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Think of this as, well, your personal shortcut to being well-informed.
Exactly, without all the overwhelming noise of the modern news cycle.
Right. We are your guides, and our mission today is pretty ambitious. We are sorting through a massive stack of global reporting from today, Wednesday, March 11th, 2026.
And it is a massive stack.
It really is.
Yeah.
We are looking at this incredible cross-section of humanity and the universe. I mean, we have everything from groundbreaking cosmic discoveries about how light behaves on a quantum level to these prehistoric mysteries buried deep in the Canadian ice.
Not to mention wild planetary weather systems.
Yeah, and rapidly shifting global power dynamics that are quite literally reshaping the global economy as we speak. But before we begin, we really need to make something very clear to you.
This is crucial.
It is. Today's global news includes some heavily politically charged content. We're talking about situations involving the United States, Iran, Israel, Russia, and Ukraine. So we have to state this clearly. We're not taking any sides here.
None at all.
We are impartially reporting on the content provided by global news outlets. We do not endorse any of these viewpoints. We are simply here to help you understand the ideas and events contained in today's reporting.
That really is the foundation of what we do here. Because when you look at the sheer volume and just the immense variety of what happened in the world today, it serves as a profound reminder of how deeply complex our reality actually is.
Oh, completely.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see that nothing happens in a vacuum. I mean, the fundamental physics of the universe dictate the boundaries of the technology we can create.
Right.
And then that same technology shapes our history, influences our geopolitical conflicts, and ultimately, trickles right down to impact the price of the food you buy at the grocery store.
Or the fuel you put in your car.
Exactly. It is all one continuous, deeply fascinating thread of cause and effect.
I completely agree. And following that thread today is going to be wild. I mean, just glancing at today's reporting, we are jumping from the extreme edge of the observable universe, peering into the microcircuitry of a digitized food fly, and landing right in the middle of a global energy crisis.
It's quite the itinerary.
I am incredibly excited for the sheer scale of the information today. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's start by looking at the absolute extreme ends of physics, out into the deep cosmos.
Always a good place to start.
According to reporting today from Live Science, astronomers have witnessed a universe-shaking collision between a black hole and a neutron star.
Right.
But the reason this is making headlines isn't just the collision itself. It's the geometry of the event.
The shape of the orbit.
Yeah, these massive bodies possessed unexpected elliptical orbits right up until the literal moment of impact. Now, to the average person, an oval orbit might not sound like front-page news.
No, it sounds pretty standard to most people. Planets have elliptical orbits.
Exactly. But in the realm of astrophysics, this is a massive anomaly. So why do elliptical orbits completely upend our baseline understanding of these cosmic mergers?
It's a phenomenal question. And to understand why astrophysicists are so stunned by this, well, we have to look at the mechanics of extreme gravity.
Okay.
Normally, when we model the interaction between two incredibly dense objects, like a black hole and a neutron star, and just for context, a neutron star is essentially the collapsed, incredibly dense, city-sized core of a dead giant star.
So dense that a teaspoon weighs as much as a mountain.
Exactly, mind-bogglingly dense. So when these two bodies get caught in each other's gravitational well, they don't just crash together instantly.
They don't just smash into each other.
No, they orbit one another for millions, sometimes billions of years, and as they execute this orbital dance, they emit gravitational waves.
Which are the ripples in space-time Einstein predicted.
Right, literal ripples in the fabric of reality. As they radiate energy away through these waves, their orbits shrink, and crucially, they circularize.
Right, because the loss of angular momentum and energy basically smooths out the orbit over time.
Precisely. So by the time they are actually close enough to physically collide and merge, standard models dictate that their orbit should be a perfect, tight circle.
The orbital eccentricity should be practically zero.
Yes, they should be perfectly round before they finally collide. So finding an elliptical or oval-shaped orbit right at the literal fraction of a second of collision that suggests that our foundational assumption is entirely wrong for this specific event.
The assumption of that slow, millions of years long dance.
Exactly. It suggests this merger wasn't a slow spiral at all.
So if it wasn't a slow, billions of year process, what was it? because it sounds almost like a sudden cosmic ambush, like one object just blindsided the other.
Ha! That is exactly the leading theory. We call it dynamical capture.
Dynamical capture.
Yeah. It implies a highly dynamic, violent, and rapid event. It likely took place in an incredibly dense region of space.
Like where?
Like a globular star cluster, or maybe the chaotic accretion disk of a supermassive black hole. In these densely packed environments, a third massive object could have been involved.
Like a cosmic game of billiards.
That's a great analogy. This third object could have gravitationally disrupted a stable binary system, violently kicking the neutron star into a highly eccentric oval path that sent it plummeting directly into the black hole almost immediately.
Giving the system absolutely no time to circularize its orbit?
Exactly.
Wow. Can you imagine the forces at play here? It's almost incomprehensible. When we detect these events using instruments like the LIGO and Virgo observatories, we are looking at gravitational waves stretching and squeezing the very space around our planet.
Yes, physical distortions of space.
So an eccentric collision like this must produce a completely different wave signature, right?
It absolutely does. The gravitational waves generated by a non-circular collision look completely different on our interferometers here on Earth.
How so?
Well, a circular merger produces a very clean, predictable signal. We call it a chirp. It smoothly increases in frequency and amplitude.
Okay.
But an eccentric merger produces a messy, repeating burst of gravitational radiation, a sort of stuttering chirp every time the objects swing close to each other at the periapsis of their oval orbit before finally merging.
Wow.
It proves that the universe is far more chaotic, crowded, and unpredictable in its violence than our neat, isolated, computerized models previously suggested.
It really is humbling. We try to put the universe into these neat mathematical boxes, and it just refuses to fit.
It always does.
And interestingly, it's not just the macro universe of black holes that is breaking our models today. It's also the microscopic quantum realm.
Yes, the light story.
Ryder, we have an astonishing report from Popular Mechanics regarding the fundamental nature of light. Scientists have discovered that light can follow something called the quantum Hall effect.
Which is huge.
It is. The reporting states that light is drifting sideways in quantized steps. Now, I know a bit about the quantum Hall effect, and this behavior was previously thought to be strictly exclusive to charged particles, like electrons.
Right. To appreciate the magnitude of this breakthrough, we really have to look back at the history of the quantum Hall effect, or QHE.
Let's do it.
The original effect was discovered back in 1980 by Klaus von Klitzing, and it was so profound that it won the Nobel Prize in Physics.
Wow.
If you take a two-dimensional sheet of electrons, essentially trapping them so they can only move on a flat plane, freeze them down to temperatures near absolute zero, and then apply a massive magnetic field perpendicular to that plane, something bizarre happens.
The resistance changes.
Yes, but the electrical resistance of that material doesn't increase smoothly as you increase the magnetic field. It jumps in distinct, precise, quantized steps. It is a massive, macroscopic demonstration of quantum mechanics.
Right, because the electrons are forced into these circular orbits called Landau levels, and they can only conduct electricity along the very edges of the material, skipping past impurities without losing energy. It's the foundation of topological insulators.
You've got it.
But here is the massive catch that makes this new headline so weird. To feel the Lorentz force, to be pushed sideways by a magnetic field, a particle must possess an electric charge.
Right.
Photons, the fundamental gauge bosons that make up light, have exactly zero electric charge. A magnet shouldn't affect a beam of light at all.
Exactly. You can hold the world's most powerful neodymium magnet next to a flashlight beam, and the light will not bend.
So how did researchers achieve this?
Well, they essentially had to trick the light. They didn't just shine a laser through a magnet. They used highly specialized, microstructured optical cavities.
What are those?
They're essentially microscopic halls of mirrors that force photons to bounce back and forth in very specific geometric patterns. By carefully designing the physical structure of these cavities, they created what physicists call a synthetic magnetic field.
So they aren't using real magnetism. They are using the physical geometry of the space to force the photons to behave mathematically as if they were charged electrons caught in a magnetic field.
That is exactly what they did. This field of study is called topological photonics. They force the photons to interact with each other and their highly engineered environment in a way that mimics the exact quantum behavior of matter.
That is wild.
The light waves drift sideways in discrete quantized steps, completely immune to backscattering or flaws in the optical cavity. If a photon running along the edge of the system hits a defect, it doesn't scatter backward. It just flows perfectly around the defect and keeps going.
Okay, that sounds incredible on paper.
Yeah.
But I have to push back a bit on the practical applications here.
Fair enough.
The article mentions this is a huge leap for quantum computing, but I hear quantum computing breakthrough about twice a month, and the issue is always scaling.
It is the main hurdle.
Qubits, the processing units of quantum computers, are notoriously unstable. The second they interact with ambient heat or stray electromagnetic fields, they lose their quantum state. It's called decoherence.
Right.
Is this topological light actually solving the decoherence problem at a mass scale? Or is this just another fascinating parlor trick confined to a highly controlled lab environment?
It's a highly valid skepticism. Decoherence is the great enemy of quantum computing. But topological photonics offers a genuine theoretical pathway out of that trap.
Well,
Because the quantum state of this light is protected by the macroscopic topology of the system, the overall shape and structure of the cavity. It is incredibly robust against local disturbances.
so it doesn't break down as easily.
Exactly. You are no longer relying on the fragile spin of a single supercooled atom. We are looking at the potential for processing information at the speed of light using photons as qubits with the absolute security and complexity of quantum mechanics.
And it wouldn't need all that supercooling.
It would be largely immune to the standard environmental interference that plagues traditional quantum computers. It is the bridge between the theoretical quantum world and stable, room temperature, high-speed optical technology.
If they can scale that, it completely changes the global computing landscape.
Entirely.
But moving from the pristine, hyper-controlled environment of a quantum optics lab back up to the messy reality of our literal skies, a BBC report brings us a much more practical orbital problem.
Yes, the space junk.
NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is currently tracking a 1,300-pound spacecraft called the Van Allen Probe A.
Right.
And it is currently making a completely uncontrolled re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. I mean, it's a sobering reminder that our orbital infrastructure is largely temporary. I might need to wear a hard hat outside today.
You might. It absolutely is a sobering reality. The Van Allen probes were incredible pieces of engineering.
Where they launched?
Launched in 2012. They provided us with invaluable, unprecedented data about the Van Allen radiation belts. These massive donuts of highly energetic charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field that surround our planet.
But they're done now.
Right, they were decommissioned in 2019, and now atmospheric drag and gravity are claiming their due. While NASA tracks these uncontrolled reentries meticulously, relying on the fact that the vast majority of the craft's aluminum and composite structure will burn up upon atmospheric friction.
There's always a risk.
Yes. The reality is that dense components, like titanium fuel tanks or heavy reaction wheels, surviving to the surface are always a statistical possibility.
Which brings up the broader, much more alarming issue of the Kessler syndrome.
Oh, absolutely.
We are actively cluttering our low Earth orbit. We have thousands of defunct satellites, spent rocket stages, and millions of pieces of shrapnel zipping around at 17,000 miles an hour.
It's a minefield.
Every time a 1,300-pound probe comes down, it's a reminder that what goes up must eventually come down, or risk becoming a hypervelocity hazard that could eventually make space travel impossible.
The Kessler syndrome is the nightmare scenario for aerospace engineers, a cascading chain reaction of collisions.
Where one crash causes another.
Exactly. Each impact creates thousands of new pieces of debris, exponentially increasing the likelihood of further collisions until low Earth orbit becomes an impassable shell of shrapnel.
Terrifying.
The uncontrolled re-entry of the Van Allen Probe A is a safe event, relatively speaking, but it highlights the growing, very practical crisis of space debris management that the international community has largely ignored in the rush to commercialize space.
It is such a stark contrast. On one hand, we have the stressful, gritty reality of human-made space junk threatening our orbital highways. But then, on the exact same day, NASA releases this breathtaking combined image from the Euclid Space Telescope and the Hubble Space Telescope.
It is stunning.
It's a high-resolution composite of the Cat's-Eye Nebula, officially known as NGC 6543, located in the Draco constellation, roughly 4,400 light-years away from Earth. It's visually amazing. These vibrant, intricate, glowing, concentric shells of gas.
It is perhaps the most beautiful juxtaposition of human endeavor. You have the mundane, entropic reality of human engineering failing and falling from low orbit, set against the majestic, multi-millennial death of a star.
Because that's what a nebula is, right?
Right. The Cat's Eye Nebula is what we call a planetary nebula, though it has nothing to do with planets. It is the final phase of a sun-like star.
What exactly happens during that phase?
Well, when the star exhausts its nuclear fuel, its core collapses, and its outer layers are violently expelled into the cosmos. The intense ultraviolet radiation from the exposed white-hot core then ionizes these expanding shells of gas.
Which causes them to glow.
Yes, causing them to glow in these magnificent colors.
And observing these structures isn't just about pretty desktop wallpapers, right? It's about understanding stellar nucleosynthesis.
Exactly. Studying the complex, nested shells of the Cat's Eye Nebula helps us understand stellar evolution and the exact fluid dynamics of how dying stars enrich the interstellar medium.
They seed the universe.
Yes. The carbon in our cells, the oxygen we breathe, the iron in our blood, all of these heavy elements were forged in the hearts of dying stars and distributed across the galaxy by events exactly like the one forming the Cat's Eye Nebula.
It really connects us to it.
It reminds us of why we bother launching those heavy 1,300-pound probes in the first place, despite the debris risks. It is our imperative to understand our deep connection to this vast, chaotic, and unimaginably beautiful universe.
That is a profound way to look at it. We are the universe trying to map itself. And honestly, our attempts to map the physical universe are currently rivaled only by our attempts to recreate biological consciousness inside a computer.
Which is a perfect segue.
Yeah, let's move into the frontier of artificial intelligence and neurobiology. RT is reporting today that a Silicon Valley startup called Eon Systems has successfully uploaded the first complete digital copy of a fruit fly's brain into a simulated environment.
A huge milestone.
And crucially, this digital brain is mimicking natural behavior. Here's where it gets really interesting. Are we looking at the dawn of digital consciousness?
This represents a monumental milestone at the intersection of neuroscience and artificial intelligence.
Just a fruit fly, though.
Well, to give some context, mapping the connectome, the complete wiring diagram of a brain, is an incredibly painstaking process. A fruit fly brain is microscopic, yet it contains roughly 130,000 individual neurons and tens of millions of synaptic connections.
Okay, so it's incredibly complex.
Very. What Eon Systems has allegedly done isn't just taking a static 3D picture of these neurons. They have digitized the synaptic weights, the electrical thresholds, and the functional dynamics.
They made it run.
Yes. They put this digital connectome into a physics engine simulation, and without any pre-programmed behavioral scripts, the digital fly began to seek out simulated food sources.
Oh, wow.
It exhibited complex mating behaviors and responded to digital stimuli exactly as a biological fly would.
Okay, I have to jump in here. Because while this sounds like science fiction made real, mapping physical synapses is only half the story of a brain, right?
Right.
Biological brains don't just run on electrical impulses zipping down wires. They are constantly bathed in a soup of neuromodulators, dopamine, serotonin, octopamine in the case of insects.
Correct.
These chemicals fundamentally alter how circuits behave in real time based on hunger, stress, or circadian rhythms. Is Eon Systems actually simulating the entire complex chemical neuromodulation of a biological organism, or have they just built a phenomenally complex but ultimately rigid electrical decision tree?
That is the exact crux of the skepticism within the broader neurobiology community today.
Okay, so I'm not crazy for asking.
Not at all. A structural connectome is just the roadmap. It doesn't tell you about the traffic, the weather, or the drivers.
Right.
If Eon Systems has only modeled the electrical action potentials, then yes, they have created a highly sophisticated automaton. But they haven't captured the fluid, state-dependent nature of biological cognition.
Well, what if they did?
However, if they have successfully integrated mathematical models of neuromodulation into this simulation, allowing virtual hormones to alter synaptic plasticity on the fly, then we have crossed a massive threshold.
If they've crossed that threshold, the philosophical implications are staggering. I mean, we are moving away from large language models that just use probability to predict the next word in a sentence.
Right.
We are moving toward biologically inspired, perhaps even biologically equivalent artificial intelligence. Just to wonder if Reducer flies will still find a way to buzz in your ear.
Huh? I wouldn't put it past them. But seriously, if you simulate an organism perfectly, at what point does that digital simulation possess a subjective experience? Does this digital fruit fly feel the urge to eat, or does it just process an integer reaching a threshold?
It's a huge question.
And more importantly, if we can simulate 130,000 neurons today, computing power trends suggest we are theoretically just decades away from simulating the 86 billion neurons of a human brain.
The ethical horizons here are entirely uncharted. If a digital simulation behaves indistinguishably from the biological original, the Turing test becomes obsolete.
Completely obsolete.
We will have to confront the reality that consciousness might not be a magical property of biological carbon, but rather an emergent property of sufficiently complex information processing, regardless of the substrate, whether it's wet meat or silicon processors.
Exactly.
And the timeline for confronting these AI ethics is accelerating rapidly. Which brings us to a highly sensitive, tragic, and legally unprecedented story, also reported by RT today.
This is a very heavy topic.
It is. In the town of Tumbler Ridge, located in British Columbia, Canada, the family of a 12-year-old girl named Maya Gabala is suing the artificial intelligence company OpenAI.
Right.
This lawsuit follows a horrific mass shooting in Tumbler Ridge that left 9 people dead. According to the reporting, the shooter allegedly used ChatGPT extensively to plan the tactical aspects of the attack.
Which is chillin'.
The most damning part of the legal allegation is that OpenAI allegedly detected these explicit prompts had internal, automated, and human deliberations about the user's intent and fundamentally failed to notify Canadian law enforcement.
Wow.
In response, Canada's AI minister is publicly demanding massive immediate safety protocol improvements from all AI vendors operating within the country.
This specific case in British Columbia is almost certainly going to become the watershed legal moment for international tech law, platform liability, and societal ethics in the AI age.
It feels like a turning point.
We are watching the collision of pre-internet legal frameworks with post-internet intelligence. If we analyze the core perspectives driving this civil disagreement, the divide is profound.
So break down the sides here.
On one side, the side of the victims' families, law enforcement agencies, and many regulatory advocates, there is a highly compelling argument regarding duty of care.
Okay.
The argument posits that AI companies possess an unprecedented, intimate visibility into the psychological intent and planning stages of their users. Unlike a search engine, which just points you to a website, an AI actively converses, refines, and aids in the planning process.
The collaborator.
Exactly. Therefore, the argument is that if an AI system detects a concrete, actionable plan for mass violence, the company must act as a mandatory reporter to protect the public.
Much like how a school teacher, a doctor, or a therapist is legally obligated to break confidentiality if a client poses an imminent threat to themselves or others.
That is the exact parallel they are drawing.
I understand the gravity of the human cost here, and the desire to prevent such tragedies is universal. But from a constitutional, right-leaning, or civil libertarian perspective, the practical application of this mandatory reporter concept to a global tech company is terrifying.
It opens up a massive can of worms.
A therapist is a highly trained human being applying nuanced clinical judgment to a specific patient. We are talking about OpenAI applying an algorithm to scan billions of text inputs from hundreds of millions of users simultaneously.
Yes.
If a tech company is forced to proactively report its users to the police based on automated risk assessments, it effectively turns artificial intelligence into the most invasive mass surveillance apparatus in human history.
That is the major concern.
Where do you draw the line? How does an algorithm distinguish between an aspiring thriller novelist writing a dark fiction prompt, a teenager morbidly exploring a historical event, and a genuine, actionable threat?
It's incredibly difficult to parse intent algorithmically.
The fear is that tech companies will be forced to act as a privatized, preemptive police force, flagging private thoughts and drafts, which completely obliterates the fundamental concept of user privacy and freedom of inquiry.
You have articulated the exact tension that legislatures are entirely unequipped to resolve right now. The legal frameworks simply do not exist to handle this dual reality.
What's the current legal standard?
Currently, in many jurisdictions, tech platforms rely on safe harbor laws, like Section 230 in the United States, which argue they are neutral platforms, mere conduits of information like a telephone provider, and therefore not liable for user speech.
But an AI isn't just a conduit.
Exactly. An AI that generates bespoke tactical advice is not a neutral conduit. It is an active participant and a curator of information. If Canada aggressively strips away this liability protection, forcing AI companies to actively police and report intent, the ripple effects will hit every single tech company globally.
It fundamentally alters the relationship between humans and machines from one of a tool to one of an overseer.
Very well said.
The idea of the machine as an overseer leads us directly into how nation-states are currently weaponizing and regulating this tech space. Let's look at the global tech race.
It's heating up everywhere.
The South China Morning Post outlines today that China's MIIT, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, has just released new, highly stringent safety rules, specifically targeting an open-source AI agent known as OpenClaw.
Right.
The MIT is explicitly warning developers and enterprises against prompt injection attacks. At the same time, Yahoo Tech reports that Apple has quietly discontinued 15 legacy hardware products.
Shedding old inventory to clear the deck.
Yeah, while simultaneously creating shockwaves in the industry with the upcoming release of the OLED MacBook Neo. This new device features an integrated touchscreen technology that is apparently causing panic among competitors.
Apple is making moves.
And on top of all of this consumer and regulatory tech news, Planet Labs, a major commercial satellite imagery company, is actively restricting access to high-resolution imagery of the Middle East. They are explicitly citing the need to protect United States national security interests.
If we synthesize these three seemingly disparate stories, Chinese AI regulation, Apple's hardware pivot, and Planet Labs' data censorship, you see the exact blueprint of how technology is fracturing along national lines.
Let's break that down. Start with China.
First, look at China's MIIT focusing on prompt injection attacks. A prompt injection attack is when a malicious user crafts a specific input that tricks an AI model into ignoring its core safety rails and original instructions.
Like digital lockpicking.
Exactly. By heavily regulating this at the state level, China is signaling that foundational AI models are considered critical national infrastructure. And any vulnerability in those models is treated as a national security threat, not just a software bug.
Interesting. And Apple.
Second, you have Apple ruthlessly consolidating its hardware ecosystem. By killing off 15 products and focusing all energy on the OLED MacBook Neo, Apple is ensuring they control the absolute bleeding edge of the human-computer interface.
Right.
In an era where AI handles the computation in the cloud, the company that controls the physical screen and the tactile input device, the hardware bottleneck controls the user experience and the data flow.
And that data flow is no longer just consumer advertising data, it's military intelligence. The Planet Labs story is fascinating.
It really is.
Commercial satellite data has become so incredibly high resolution and ubiquitous that private companies are holding data that used to be the exclusive domain of state intelligence agencies like the CIA or the NRO.
Yes.
By restricting imagery of the Middle East, Planet Labs is essentially acting as an arm of the U.S. defense apparatus, preventing adversarial nations or non-state actors from using commercial tech for tactical targeting.
Exactly. We are witnessing the complete militarization of private tech. The boundaries between private enterprise, public safety, and national defense have entirely evaporated.
The global internet is splintering into regional, highly defended techno-silos.
It's a fractured landscape now.
It's an exhausting reality to keep up with. So let's take a hard pivot away from the hyper-accelerated future and dig deep into our distant past, using modern science to rewrite history.
I'm ready for a pivot.
Yahoo News is covering a massive archaeological discovery in the Canadian wilderness. Archaeologists have used advanced techniques, likely including LiDAR, to peer through dense canopy to unearth an 11,000-year-old indigenous settlement.
This is one of those foundational discoveries that forces academics to literally rewrite textbook timelines.
Because it challenges everything we thought we knew.
For decades, the dominant paradigm in North American archaeology was the Clovis first theory.
Tell us about that.
This theory posited that the first humans arrived in the Americas roughly 13,000 years ago, migrating on foot across the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia to Alaska, and then slowly dispersing southward through an ice-free corridor as the glaciers retreated. They were identifiable by their distinct fluted Clovis spear points.
But over the last few decades, that theory has been taking heavy fire from various pre-Clovis finds in places like Chile and Texas.
Yes, exactly.
This new 11,000-year-old settlement in Canada seems to be another massive nail in the coffin for the Clovis first timeline.
It absolutely is. Finding a complex, highly established settlement deep in the Canadian wilderness that dates back 11,000 years via stratigraphy and radiocarbon dating, it suggests a completely different narrative.
What does it imply?
It implies that indigenous populations had not only arrived much earlier than conservative estimates suggested.
Potentially utilizing coastal migration routes via boats along the Pacific Kelp Highway before the inland ice corridors even opened.
Right. But also that they had adapted, thrived, and built complex social and architectural structures in incredibly harsh post-glacial environments rapidly.
That's amazing.
It adds profound depth and longevity to the timeline of continuous indigenous history and complex societal development in North America long prior to any European contact.
It's a testament to human adaptability.
Oh,
We tend to underestimate the ingenuity of ancient peoples.
we really do.
But of course, the ancient world wasn't always a story of thriving settlement. Sometimes it was a brutal story of bare survival. And we have two wildly contrasting stories, highlighting the extremes of the hominid experience today.
These are intense stories.
Over in a cave system in Belgium, researchers have analyzed 41,000-year-old Neanderthal bones. According to the Yahoo report, these bones show clear, undeniable microscopic striations indicative of defleshing, marrow extraction, and cannibalism.
Very grim.
Now contrast that grim reality with another Yahoo report from today. Archaeologists digging in Spain have discovered a 5,000-year-old tomb filled to the absolute brim with intricate treasures, artisan artifacts, and evidence of highly complex, resource-intensive burial rites.
What's fascinating here is the juxtaposition of these two sites, separated by roughly 36,000 years of geological time. It perfectly illustrates the profound impact of climate, resource availability, and agricultural development on societal behavior.
Okay, let's look at the Belgian cave first.
41,000 years ago, Europe was experiencing extreme climatic fluctuations associated with the last glacial period. The landscape was unforgiving tundra.
And the Neanderthals.
The Neanderthal populations were highly robust, cold-adapted hominids, but they required immense caloric intake to survive.
Right.
The evidence of cannibalism, the precise cut marks showing careful defleshing, and the percussion marks from smashing long bones to extract marrow, it rarely points to ritualistic behavior in this era.
What did it point to?
It almost universally points to extreme, desperate nutritional stress. It was a localized apocalypse. When the megafauna migrated or died off due to cold snaps, these isolated family groups ran out of options.
Wow.
Cannibalism was the ultimate survival mechanic in a brutal, zero-sum environment.
And then you fast forward 36,000 years to the Iberian Peninsula in modern-day Spain. By 5,000 years ago, humanity has undergone the Neolithic Revolution. We have domesticated plants and animals. We have stable agrarian societies.
Exactly. The tomb in Spain represents the luxury of surplus. When a society transitions from chasing migrating herds to cultivating reliable grain yields, they generate excess caloric wealth.
Which changes everything.
That wealth allows for population growth, the division of labor, and the creation of specialized artisan classes. The society that built that tomb had conquered base survival to the point where they could afford to invest massive amounts of human labor, precious metals, and intricate artistry into something that yielded absolutely no immediate physical return.
The afterlife.
Yes, they had the economic luxury to construct elaborate mythologies, to mourn with grandeur, and to honor their elite dead with material wealth. It is the transition from biological desperation to cultural expression.
Speaking of cultural expression and the complexities of human artistry, Yahoo also reports today that art historians, utilizing high-resolution infrared reflectography, have found a hidden detail beneath the layers of paint in a 500-year-old Leonardo da Vinci masterpiece.
Oh, this is a fun one.
And, well, the hidden underdrawing is located right in the lower abdomen and crotch area of the subject. It seems Da Vinci couldn't resist leaving a somewhat scandalous, anatomically explicit Easter egg for us to uncover 5 centuries later.
It is entirely fitting for his character. Leonardo da Vinci was as much an obsessive anatomist as he was a painter.
Right.
He illegally dissected dozens of human cadavers to understand the musculature and mechanics of the human body. What infrared reflectography allows us to do is peer through the thin, translucent glazes of oil paint to see the original charcoal or silver point sketches he made directly on the panel before applying color.
And what does finding this sketch tell us?
Finding a subversive or hyper-detailed anatomical sketch hidden under the modesty of a finished Renaissance garment reveals the deeply human, mischievous, and obsessive process behind these revered, almost mythologized masterpieces.
He couldn't out himself.
He was painting reality as he knew it beneath the skin, even if the patron only wanted to see the clothed ideal.
It reminds us that history isn't a static collection of pristine facts. It is layered, messy, and constantly being reevaluated with new technology. And sometimes, That history reveals sudden apocalyptic violence.
We have another impact event to discuss.
We do. Science Daily confirms today that geologists have finally solved the mystery of the Silverpit crater. It's a massive geological anomaly located deep under the North Sea. Through core sampling, they have confirmed it was indeed caused by an asteroid impact roughly 43 to 46 million years ago.
Incredible they found the proof.
The asteroid is estimated to have been 160 meters in diameter, and the impact triggered a 100-meter, that is a 330-foot tsunami.
The confirmation of the Silverpit crater's extraterrestrial origin is a triumph of marine geology. For a long time, there was debate whether this multi-ringed crater was caused by salt withdrawal tectonics or an impact.
So what was the smoking gun?
The smoking gun, confirmed in this report, is the discovery of shock quartz minerals in the deep core samples.
What is shock quartz?
Quartz is a very common, highly stable crystal, but when it is subjected to the unimaginable instantaneous pressure of a hypervelocity asteroid impact.
Pressures exceeding tens of thousands of atmospheres in a fraction of a second.
Exactly. The crystalline lattice of the quartz physically fractures along parallel microscopic planes. This is called planar deformation features, or shock quartz. It cannot be created by standard volcanic activity or tectonic pressure. It only happens during an impact or a nuclear explosion.
And the immediate aftermath of that impact is terrifying to visualize. A 160-meter piece of rock hitting the shallow ocean shelf. The kinetic energy transfer would displace millions of tons of water instantly, generating a 100-meter tsunami.
Unfathomable power.
That is a wall of water, the height of a 33-story skyscraper, moving at hundreds of miles an hour across the prehistoric North Sea basin. It would entirely devastate the coastlines of what is now Europe and the UK. It drastically altered the local ecology and climate for centuries.
It is a profoundly humbling realization. We worry about human-caused climate change, and rightly so. But the confirmation of Silverpit reminds us that our planet exists in a chaotic, cosmic shooting gallery.
Right.
The ground beneath our feet and the stability of our oceans are subject to sudden, violent resets by external forces that care nothing for biological life.
Which is a perfect thematic bridge into the current state of our planet, because the Earth today is proving it doesn't need an asteroid impact to be incredibly violent and volatile.
It's doing just fine on its own.
We are seeing immense kinetic energy expressing itself across the globe today. Let's do a fast-paced tour of the current severe weather and geological anomalies.
It's a lot.
Starting in the Pacific, in the United States, SF Gate reports that Hawaii's Kilauea volcano is currently undergoing a massive eruption. It is aggressively shooting lava fountains 1,300 feet into the air, which has forced emergency mass evacuations of the surrounding national park areas.
Very dangerous situation.
Moving to the continental U.S., FOX Weather is tracking a massive, highly energetic storm system tearing through the Midwest. It has already spawned multiple tornadoes and dropped catastrophic 6-inch hail, literally chunks of ice the size of cantaloupes, devastating the communities of Kankakee, Illinois, and Lake Village, Indiana.
6-inch hail is lethal.
Further west, Yahoo reports that Southern California is currently baking under a highly dangerous, record-shattering heatwave dome. And all the way across the Atlantic, the BBC reports that the United Kingdom is being absolutely battered by severe, destructive gales that are knocking out power grids, which are bizarrely being immediately followed by wintry snow showers.
When you look at all these headlines simultaneously, you are looking at the thermodynamic reality of a rapidly warming global atmosphere.
Right.
With the exception of Kilauea, which is driven by deep mantle plumes and tectonic friction rather than atmospheric weather, the rest of these events are inextricably linked.
How so?
The Clausius-Clapeyron relation in physics dictates that for every 1 degree Celsius the atmosphere warms, it can hold approximately 7% more water vapor.
And more water vapor means more latent heat energy stored in the sky.
Exactly. When you have a massive, stagnant, high-pressure heat dome sitting over Southern California, it forces the jet stream into extreme undulating patterns. The thermal contrast between that trapped heat and cooler northern air descending into the Midwest creates extreme atmospheric instability.
Which causes the hail.
Yes. Generating the explosive updrafts required to keep a 6-inch hailstone suspended long enough to freeze before it drops on Illinois and Indiana. That same destabilized, meandering jet stream is what pulls violent, rapidly intensifying low-pressure gales across the UK, followed immediately by Arctic air dumping snow.
It's all connected.
We are witnessing a planetary climate system struggling to distribute an immense excess of trapped thermal energy.
It is a planetary system in rebellion. But once the extreme weather passes, the news cameras pack up and leave. The human toll, however, continues to compound.
That's the real tragedy.
Inside Climate News published a deeply sobering report today regarding a comprehensive University of Hawaii study. They've been monitoring the displaced residents of Maui, Hawaii, following the catastrophic, lethal wildfires of 2023.
Right.
The data reveals a profound, enduring mental health crisis among the survivors. We are talking about severe clinical depression, crippling survivor's guilt, and massive spikes in anxiety. But the crucial finding of the study is the underlying cause.
The economic factor.
Yes, over half of this measured increase in severe anxiety and depression is directly, statistically linked to ongoing job loss and housing instability, not just the trauma of the fire itself.
This study highlights a critical failure in how we handle post-disaster recovery. The psychological trauma of fleeing a wall of flame is horrific, but it is an acute trauma.
Right.
The chronic trauma, the trauma that hollows out a community, begins the day after the fire is out. It is a stark demonstration of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When a natural disaster vaporizes a town, it doesn't just destroy wood and concrete. It instantly induces total socioeconomic collapse.
Everything is gone.
People lose their generational homes, their places of employment burn to the ground, and the communal infrastructure vanishes. The psychological scaffolding of daily life is destroyed. The Maui data proves that climate trauma is inextricably linked to economic trauma.
Because you can't just treat the anxiety in a vacuum.
You cannot medicate or therapy away the profound anxiety of a survivor if they do not know where they are sleeping next week or how they will buy food. Recovery requires the immediate, sustained restoration of economic stability, which is vastly more complex than just clearing the debris.
It is heartbreaking, and it demands a total rethink of how governments manage disaster relief. But amidst this grim reality of fragile human infrastructure, nature itself is demonstrating both deep vulnerability and shocking resilience.
It's a mixed bag out there.
On the vulnerability side, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, released a grim study today showing how human activity is compounding climate stress. The study proves that agricultural nutrient pollution, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from fertilizers entering the ocean, when combined with warming ocean temperatures, is exponentially accelerating severe coral bleaching events globally.
That's devastating for the oceans.
But conversely, a fascinating report from Science Alert reveals that scientists have discovered bumblebee queens possess a previously unknown evolutionary superpower. These queens have evolved the physiological ability to survive, being completely submerged underwater for days at a time during extreme winter floods.
It perfectly encapsulates the duality of the natural world under stress. The coral reefs represent the extreme fragility of highly specialized symbiotic ecosystems.
They rely on the algae.
Right. A coral polyp relies entirely on microscopic algae called zooxanthellae living inside its tissue to photosynthesize and provide food. When the water gets too hot, the coral becomes stressed and expels the algae, turning stark white. That's bleaching.
And the pollution makes it worse.
The NOAA study shows that nutrient pollution supercharges this stress, making the coral far less resilient to minor temperature spikes. The entire foundational ecosystem of the ocean is collapsing under human pressure.
And then you have the bees.
But then you look at the bumblebee queens. During the winter, they bury themselves in the soil and enter a state of suspended animation called diapause to survive the freeze. With the increasing frequency of severe winter flooding due to climate change, researchers assumed the hibernating queens would drown, leading to colony collapse in the spring.
But they don't.
Instead, they discovered these insects have evolved highly specialized spiracles-breathing tubes and metabolic adaptations that allow them to extract trace amounts of dissolved oxygen directly from the floodwaters.
That is wild.
Surviving submerged for up to a week. It is a stunning display of biological resilience honed over millions of years, showing that life possesses profound, unexpected mechanisms to survive localized cataclysms.
It does give you a necessary dose of hope that nature always finds a way. But speaking of complex systems under extreme stress, we must transition now into our geopolitical and economic coverage.
This is where things get very complicated.
Before we dive into these highly volatile flashpoints, I am going to issue a strict reminder to our listeners. The following news encompasses ongoing global conflicts, military actions, and intense political debate. We are impartially delivering the facts and the statements exactly as they are reported today by international outlets including Reuters, the BBC, RT, and Al Jazeera. We are not endorsing the political actions, the strategic statements, or the ideological viewpoints of any nation, any leader, or any media outlet discussed. We are strictly observing the geopolitical board.
Understood. And the board today is vibrating with tension. The stakes across multiple theaters have escalated significantly.
Let's begin with the rapidly expanding U.S.-Israel-Iran conflict, which is now entering its 12th day of intense kinetic action. The New York Times is reporting relentless, overlapping missile and drone strikes across the entire region. But the most sensitive and controversial development today comes from an RT report.
Yes.
RT alleges that a highly devastating strike occurred on a girls' school in the city of Menopause, located in the Hormuz province of Iran. The report states that roughly 170 children were killed, and RT specifically alleges that the strike involved a United States Tomahawk cruise missile.
A horrific claim.
This claim has instantly triggered massive international condemnation, with UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, releasing a scathing statement demanding accountability for the destruction of civilian educational infrastructure.
The geopolitical fallout from that is immense.
The domestic political fallout within the United States is equally fractured. Conservative commentator Tucker Carlson is publicly and aggressively criticizing the U.S. military involvement, demanding an immediate halt to what he characterizes as an endless, disastrous foreign intervention.
And the administration's response.
Meanwhile, the current U.S. President, Donald Trump, has taken a hardline stance. He publicly claimed today that there is, quote, practically nothing left to target in Iran, reiterating that his administration's absolute primary objective is the total dismantling of Iran's capability to acquire a nuclear weapon.
So he's staying the course.
Adding another layer of domestic friction, Al Jazeera reports that Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. Congress are pushing back fiercely against the Trump administration, demanding legal assurances that ground troops will not be deployed, a scenario the administration has thus far refused to entirely rule out.
The situation is a highly combustible labyrinth of military strategy, intense domestic political maneuvering, and profound human tragedy. Let's analyze the competing paradigms here. The allegation regarding the strike in Menab, Hormuz province, is the flashpoint.
Right.
When civilian targets, especially schools, are hit with mass casualties, the entire international narrative fractures. UNESCO's involvement highlights the perspective of international humanitarian law, which demands absolute distinction between combatants and civilians.
In the Trump administration's perspective.
From the perspective of the Trump administration, the operational doctrine is one of total, overwhelming decapitation of an imminent threat. The stated goal is the neutralization of a nuclear program that the administration views as an existential threat to global security and regional allies like Israel. The strategy relies on massive, punitive cruise missile and air campaigns to destroy deeply buried infrastructure.
But they are facing massive internal pushback.
Yes. However, this strategy faces intense pushback from multiple, normally opposed domestic factions. You have the anti-interventionist right, voiced by figures like Tucker Carlson, arguing that the U.S. has no vital national interest in another Middle Eastern war that drains resources and invites asymmetric retaliation.
And the Democrats.
Simultaneously, you have the Democratic opposition in Congress terrified of mission creep. They are looking at the historical precedent of the last 20 years, where precision air campaigns eventually devolve into messy, prolonged ground occupations in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and they are demanding legislative guardrails to prevent a massive deployment of infantry into a highly hostile mountainous terrain.
The friction between the executive branch's military objectives and the legislative branch's fear of a quagmire is immense.
It is paralyzing.
And while the bombs fall, the economic retaliation is already hitting the global market like a sledgehammer. Al Jazeera reports today that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has officially declared the Strait of Hormuz completely closed to international shipping.
This is the big one.
They are actively threatening to drive global oil prices to $200 a barrel. National Public Radio in the U.S. reports that the situation in the water is already kinetic. The U.S. Navy has actively engaged and sunk 16 Iranian mine layer vessels that were attempting to seed the strait with naval mines.
Very dangerous escalation.
The panic in the energy markets is palpable. The Wall Street Journal notes that in a desperate bid to calm the markets, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, is coordinating a massive, historically unprecedented release of 400 million barrels of emergency oil reserves from its member nations.
To understand the panic, you have to understand the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most critical geopolitical choke point on planet Earth.
Give us the scale of it.
It is a narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, roughly 20% of the entire world's global oil supply, and a massive percentage of its liquefied natural gas flows through that narrow gap every single day.
So closing it is catastrophic.
By declaring it closed and deploying mine layers, the IRGC is utilizing the ultimate asymmetrical weapon. They are holding the entire global economy hostage. The U.S. Navy sinking those vessels demonstrates the absolute non-negotiable strategic necessity of keeping that sea lane open for global trade.
And the IEA's response.
The IEA's release of 400 million barrels is a massive economic tourniquet designed to flood the market with supply and stop the price from spiking. Because if oil actually sustains a price of $200 a barrel, the elasticity of demand breaks. Global shipping costs skyrocket overnight, heavy manufacturing halts due to energy costs, agricultural supply chains break down, and massive, crippling inflation hits every single consumer product on the shelf.
And we are already seeing the massive real-world casualties of this energy war right now. RT reports today that Volkswagen, the largest automaker in the European Union, is officially slashing 50,000 jobs in Germany.
Huge blow to their economy.
In their corporate statement, they explicitly cite the crippling industrial energy crisis and the permanent loss of cheap Russian gas ties as the primary drivers of this mass layoff. And in a stark demonstration of how global markets adapt to bypass sanctions and conflict, RT also notes that India is heavily increasing its imports of heavily discounted Russian Urals crude oil, effectively serving as an economic workaround and snapping up the energy supply that Europe refuses to touch.
The Volkswagen story perfectly illustrates the devastating ripple effects of geopolitical energy shocks. The German industrial model for the last 3 decades was predicated on highly reliable, cheap pipeline gas from Russia.
Right.
With that severed by the Ukraine conflict and Middle Eastern oil now under threat in the Strait of Hormuz, European heavy industry is simply no longer globally competitive. They cannot afford to keep the factories running. An energy conflict thousands of miles away instantly destroys 50,000 livelihoods in the heart of Europe.
And India steps in.
Meanwhile, India, acting in its own pragmatic national interest, capitalizes on the massive discount of Russian Urals crude. The global energy supply chain is like water. If you block it with sanctions or mines in one place, it will find the path of least resistance to flow elsewhere, enriching Russia while providing cheap fuel for India's massive economic engine. Energy is the true underlying currency and the ultimate weapon dictating all of these global conflicts.
Which brings us directly to the other massive geopolitical flashpoint dominating the news: the war in Russia and Ukraine and its impact on the European continent. RT is reporting today that UK-made Storm Shadow cruise missiles, fired by Ukrainian forces, have successfully struck targets deep inside the Russian city of Bryansk, resulting in civilian casualties.
A major escalation.
Concurrently, the BBC reports that Ukraine claims to have successfully targeted and destroyed a highly critical Russian missile component manufacturing plant. On the Russian side, President Vladimir Putin claimed in an address today that Russian armed forces have successfully reclaimed and secured 40% of the territory within the contested Donetsk People's Republic.
The battlefield is shifting rapidly.
But perhaps the most surprising and consequential political development comes from within the European Union itself. RT reports that a massive, critical €90 billion EU financial loan package destined to prop up the Ukrainian government is currently being completely blocked.
By one nation.
Yes, and it is being blocked by a single EU member state. Hungary, led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The veto is reportedly entirely over a bitter dispute regarding the transit fees and security of the Druzhba oil pipeline. And amidst all this kinetic and economic warfare, RT notes that U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a direct phone call today to discuss potential mediation frameworks.
The pace at which the alliances and the defined red lines are shifting is staggering. The deployment of advanced Western-supplied munitions like the UK-made Storm Shadow missiles directly into sovereign Russian territory, such as the city of Bryansk, represents a massive tactical escalation.
Right, because it crosses the border.
It completely blurs the line of proxy warfare and draws NATO nations dangerously close to direct, overt conflict with a nuclear power. But simultaneously, as the battlefield escalates, the political unity supporting Ukraine is showing severe structural fractures.
The Hungary veto.
Exactly. The European Union requires unanimous consent for these massive financial packages. Hungary utilizing its veto power to block a €90 billion lifeline to Kyiv over the Druzhba oil pipeline, which carries Russian oil through Ukraine to Hungary, demonstrates that raw national energy and economic interests are beginning to aggressively override the broader European consensus of unwavering support for Ukraine.
And the phone call.
Furthermore, the back-channel phone call between President Trump and President Putin suggests a highly complex diplomatic maneuver. It suggests an attempt by the U.S. administration to bypass traditional stalled diplomatic routes in Europe to find direct leverage, possibly seeking to link the resolution of the crisis in Ukraine with the escalating immediate crisis in the Middle East. It is a highly volatile, deeply cynical, multipolar geopolitical chess match where nations are constantly trading pieces.
It is incredibly heavy. The scale of the geopolitical tension is frankly exhausting. So I'm going to make an executive decision here and take a breath.
Probably a good idea.
Let's pivot away from the threat of global war and look at the more intimate scale of human endeavor. We are going to look at society, health, and human capability. And I am expressing genuine relief at having some highly practical, positive news to share.
Let's hear it.
The BBC is reporting today that the UK's National Health Service, the NHS, has officially approved a revolutionary non-hormonal daily pill specifically designed to treat severe menopausal hot flushes. This single approval is projected to dramatically aid roughly 500,000 women in the UK alone who, for various serious medical reasons, cannot take standard hormone replacement therapy or HRT.
This represents a quiet but absolutely massive victory for public health, precision medicine, and the quality of life for millions of women.
It's a huge deal.
For decades, the standard of care for severe menopausal symptoms has been HRT, supplementing the body with estrogen and progesterone. However, women who have a medical history of hormone receptor-positive breast cancers, severe cardiovascular disease, or a high risk of deep vein thrombosis have been entirely locked out of this treatment.
They just couldn't take it.
They were essentially told by the medical establishment to just suffer through debilitating hot flushes, night sweats, and the cascading sleep deprivation that follows. This new non-hormonal pill targets a completely different pathway.
It doesn't work.
It utilizes neurokinin-3 receptor antagonists to directly block the specific neural signals in the brain's hypothalamus that incorrectly trigger the body's heat dissipation mechanisms. It is a brilliant leap in pharmacology, finally acknowledging and effectively treating a massive demographic that has historically been ignored and underserved by medical research.
That is fantastic news. Also in the realm of health and longevity, Yahoo Health is heavily promoting new nutritional science regarding carbohydrates. They are pushing the consumption of complex, unrefined carbs, like beans, lentils, and whole grains, as the key mechanism for losing dangerous visceral belly fat.
Right.
Simultaneously, primary care physicians are blanketing the news cycle today with stark warnings for anyone over the age of 50. The medical consensus is urging older adults to heavily and strictly limit the consumption of specific, highly refined and ultra-processed foods, particularly those combining high-fructose corn syrup with processed seed oils, to prevent the onset of chronic inflammatory diseases like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease.
The science is getting very clear on this.
It really seems the nutritional science is finally, firmly settling on quality over quantity when it comes to diet, especially as human metabolism shifts with age.
The science is unequivocally pointing toward the microbiome and metabolic efficiency. Visceral fat, the hard fat that wraps around your internal organs like your liver and pancreas, is highly metabolically active.
It's not just sitting there.
No, it constantly pumps inflammatory cytokines into your bloodstream. Ultra-processed foods spike insulin unnaturally, driving the accumulation of this specific dangerous fat. Complex, unrefined carbohydrates do the opposite. They feed the gut microbiome and slow digestion, preventing those massive insulin spikes. The medical community is shifting away from simple calorie counting and focusing on how specific food matrices chemically interact with aging endocrine systems.
Moving from the health of our bodies to the health of our society, we have a completely different, somewhat whimsical societal shift reported by the BBC. The Bank of England is officially allowing the British public to vote on which native wildlife species will replace historical human figures on the back of their newly minted banknotes.
Oh, wow.
I have to admit, I absolutely love this concept. The idea of replacing polarizing politicians or monarchs with an etching of a badger, a red squirrel, or a kingfisher bird is just delightful.
Yeah, it is a genuinely delightful story. But if you look closer, it reflects a much deeper, very modern societal shift in values.
How so?
Historically, currency has always been the ultimate billboard for state power. Kings, queens, conquering generals, and politicians were stamped on coins and paper to project authority and national identity. Moving deliberately away from human historical figures who, under the modern lens, are often highly polarizing or possess complex, controversial legacies, and shifting toward native biodiversity reflects a society that is trying to redefine its national pride.
That's a great point.
It's a modern society trying to foster a broader connection with environmental conservation and shared natural heritage, rather than imperial history. It is a subtle but profound change in national branding.
To wrap up today's massive news stack, let's look at the absolute peak of human physical capability. Because today was a historic day in global sports. In the United States, Bam Adebayo of the Miami Heat scored a mind-bending 83 points in a single NBA basketball game.
Unbelievable.
His post-game quote to the press, picked up by the BBC, was instantly legendary. "It's Wilt, me, then Kobe." And in the world of track and field endurance, RT reports that Uganda's distance-running phenom, Jacob Kiplimo, has completely shattered the half-marathon world record in Lisbon, Portugal, running an absolutely insane time of 57 minutes and 20 seconds.
These sports highlights serve as a beautiful, necessary counterbalance to the heavy geopolitical gravity we spent so much time analyzing today. They remind us of the ceiling of human potential.
83 points is just insane.
Bam Adebayo dropping 83 points in a modern NBA game with complex zone defenses and elite athleticism on the floor requires a level of physical endurance, biomechanical precision, and a psychological flow state that is almost superhuman. He rightly places himself in the pantheon next to Wilt Chamberlain's untouchable 100-point game and Kobe Bryant's 81.
In the half marathon.
And then you look at Jacob Kiplimo in Lisbon, Portugal. Running 13.1 miles in 57 minutes and 20 seconds means he is sustaining an average pace of roughly 4 minutes and 22 seconds per mile. He is holding a sprint pace that the vast majority of human beings on this planet cannot sustain for a single 100-meter dash, let alone for an hour straight. It is a testament to the absolute limits of human VO2 max, running economy, and sheer willpower.
It is genuinely awe-inspiring. What an immense journey this deep dive has been today. We have thoroughly unpacked the bizarre quantum mechanics of topological light, the violent elliptical orbits of cosmic giants, the ethical nightmares of AI serving as mandatory reporters in Canada, the unearthing of our deep indigenous past in the Canadian wilderness, the volatile thermodynamic weather tearing across the globe, and the incredibly fragile, tense, geopolitical chess match stretching from the minefields of the Strait of Hormuz to the missile strikes in Russia.
It's been a marathon.
Thank you to our expert for constantly connecting the dots and guiding us through this labyrinth. And more importantly, thank you, the listener. Thank you for taking the time, the focus, and the energy to truly understand the complex mechanics of your world today.
It has been a distinct privilege to analyze this with you. As we close, I would like to leave you with a lingering question to mull over.
Go ahead.
Today, we discussed an 11,000-year-old indigenous settlement thriving in a post-glacial wilderness and a 41,000-year-old Neanderthal cave where hominids fought off starvation during an ice age. Those ancient humans survived massive climatic cataclysms and brutal environments using nothing but stone tools, fire, and community. Today, as we face our own modern compounding crises, from the ethical dilemmas of artificial superintelligence and highly volatile planetary climates to the very real threat of global conflict over the flow of fossil fuels, we must ask ourselves, are we actually using our incredibly advanced technology to build a more adaptable, resilient society like our ancestors did? Or are we just utilizing our brilliance to create entirely new, highly efficient ways to drive ourselves to extinction?
Wow.
It is something to think about the next time you look up at the night sky or ponder the beautiful, violent death of the Cat's Eye Nebula.
That is a profoundly heavy but necessary thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep exploring the connections around you, and we will catch you next time.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to The Debate. Today, we're focusing our attention on the planetary economic and geopolitical implications of the current 12-day U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran. We're looking far beyond the immediate tactical theater here to understand exactly how this conflict is reverberating across the globe.
That's right. And to grasp the true magnitude of this moment, we're drawing on a vast array of international reports. We aren't just looking at Washington or Tehran. We're looking at Asian energy markets, European industrial data, urgent summits within the African Union, and diplomatic statements emerging from Latin America. This isn't just a regional conflict. It's really a planetary stress test.
Which brings us to the core question we're examining today. Is the escalating Middle East conflict merely causing temporary, manageable market shocks that the U.S.-led global system is successfully absorbing? Or is it fundamentally fracturing the current economic order, accelerating a permanent shift toward a multipolar BRICS-led world?
Essentially, are we witnessing a system adapting under pressure or a system breaking apart at the seams?
I'll be arguing that the established global economic order, led by coordinated Western institutions, is proving its resilience and successfully managing this crisis.
And I'll be arguing that the conflict is inflicting irreversible structural damage on Western economies while actively driving the global South to permanently decouple from U.S. hegemony.
So let's start with the mechanisms of resilience. Despite the undeniable volatility we've seen over the past 12 days of this war, global markets and allied networks are demonstrating remarkable control. We aren't seeing the collapse of the international economic engine. We're seeing its shock absorbers functioning exactly as designed. Look at the energy markets. The International Energy Agency, in coordination with the G7, just initiated an unprecedented release of 400 million barrels of stockpiled oil to stabilize global markets.
But a release from strategic petroleum reserves is the very definition of a short-term solution.
Dumping oil into the market, the system is demonstrating profound pragmatism. Take the United States issuing a 30-day waiver, allowing India to purchase 30 million barrels of Russian oil.
Right.
Think about what that waiver actually means. The U.S. is weaponizing its own flexibility. By explicitly allowing India to buy Russian oil right now, Washington prevents a global supply crunch that would hurt Western consumers, while simultaneously keeping an emerging superpower tethered to the U.S. legal framework. It's a highly sophisticated balancing act. And if you want proof of long-term economic confidence in this established order, look at where global capital is physically moving. India's Reliance Industries is currently investing a staggering $300 billion in a Texas oil refinery. That isn't the behavior of an international community that believes the U.S. economic engine is failing. It proves that despite the geopolitical friction, the center is holding. Global capital still trusts the established system.
I come at it from a different way. You call it resilience, but the current system is not coping, it's cracking. What we are witnessing aren't temporary market fluctuations. These are energy shocks causing permanent structural damage to the West, particularly in Europe. The coordinated oil releases you mentioned, that's nothing more than a temporary bandage on a deep systemic wound. You have to look at the structural reality on the ground in Germany, the industrial heart of Europe. Volkswagen is currently slashing 50,000 jobs because their net income has literally halved, largely due to soaring energy costs.
Yeah, but
When a titan like Volkswagen cuts 50,000 jobs, that manufacturing capacity doesn't just go on pause. It disappears, or it relocates to regions with cheaper energy. Over in the UK, mortgage rates are surging to their highest levels since last August, and consumers are bracing for looming fuel tax hikes. The domestic economic pain across the West is profound. Meanwhile, the global South is actively and perhaps permanently decoupling in response to this. We're seeing leaders like Brazilian President Lula da Silva and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa openly condemning the military actions. And they aren't just offering empty rhetoric. They are actively pitching deep BRICS defense cooperation specifically to avoid what they term foreign invasion.
But defense cooperation pitches happen at every BRICS summit. I mean, that doesn't mean they have the logistical capacity to replace the U.S.-led order.
It's not just summits, though. Countries are fundamentally restructuring their physical supply chains. China is accelerating the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline with Russia, aiming to import 50 billion cubic meters annually. That isn't just an energy deal. It's an overland pipeline that completely bypasses vulnerable Western-controlled maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. It's physical immunity from Western naval blockades. The tectonic plates of planetary power are shifting irrevocably.
Let's drill down into your point about energy markets and this concept of European deindustrialization.
I'll acknowledge that Brent crude spiked dramatically, nearing $119 a barrel at the height of the recent panic. That's a serious number. However, the U.S. administration has made it an explicit strategy to keep the global markets top of mind while conducting this campaign. They've deliberately avoided a massive destabilizing ground invasion in favor of targeted operations. They've clearly learned the harsh economic and strategic lessons of the Afghanistan occupation. By keeping the military footprint limited and coordinating those massive strategic reserve releases we talked about, the U.S. is successfully preventing a global recession. The volatility is contained.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You're praising the avoidance of a ground invasion, but you're completely ignoring the catastrophic secondary effects of these targeted strikes. You say the volatility is contained, but natural gas costs in Germany have doubled compared to pre-escalation levels. Doubled. And the fallout in energy-intensive sectors, we're talking about metal fabrication, pharmaceuticals, electronics, they are seeing their output plummet by 7 to 12%. This isn't a temporary dip we can smooth over with a 30-day oil waiver. This is rapid deindustrialization.
But industrial output fluctuates during any major geopolitical event. European markets have absorbed energy shocks before, particularly following the initial invasion of Ukraine, and they adapted by finding alternative suppliers.
But the environmental and economic fallout of these targeted operations is entirely uncontrollable this time. We are seeing reports of literal black rain falling over Tehran because of the strikes on their oil facilities. This is contaminating rainwater with soot and harmful particles, threatening an ecological and humanitarian crisis that transcends borders and markets. You cannot contain the economic fallout when the ecological reality is raining toxicity onto civilian populations and destroying regional agriculture. The long-term costs of this limited footprint approach are absolutely devastating.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how the international community is responding to that exact instability. Even in the face of environmental crises and market disruptions, traditional rivals are actively seeking stability under the umbrella of the current system, rather than abandoning it. If the global order were truly fracturing the way you suggest, we would see nations burning bridges to protect themselves. Instead, we see India deliberately easing investment norms for Chinese companies to boost domestic manufacturing. They are moving past years of intense border friction because the economic imperative of the global market demands cooperation.
But they're cooperating with each other, not with Washington.
The cooperation is happening within the framework of globalized trade that the West built. Even more tellingly, leaders who are fundamentally adversarial to the West are operating within its diplomatic frameworks right now. President Putin and former President Trump are maintaining phone communications regarding oil sanctions and the parameters of the war. There is a planetary desire to maintain the economic status quo. The lines of communication remain open precisely because no one, not even the fiercest critics of the U.S., actually wants the established global market to collapse.
That argument assumes the West itself is presenting a united front to uphold that system. But the reality highlights deep, unprecedented fractures within the Western alliance itself. We aren't just seeing a divide between the West and the rest. We are seeing the European Union basically have a geopolitical identity crisis in real time. Look at the extreme split at the absolute highest levels of European leadership. You have European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen aggressively supporting the strikes, while European Council President Antonio Costa is publicly opposing them, arguing that human rights and freedom cannot be achieved through this kind of violence.
Internal debate within the European Union is a feature of democratic alliances, not a bug.
It's far beyond polite internal debate. The rhetoric from member states is severe. Spain's Deputy Prime Minister, Yolanda Díaz, explicitly called Germany a U.S. vassal for its subservience to Washington's demands regarding this conflict. She is actively demanding that the EU reduce its economic and technological dependence on the United States. When the core allies of the American-led order are openly calling each other vassal states and demanding structural independence, you cannot argue that the diplomatic architecture is holding firm. It's fracturing from within.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Yes, the rhetoric is heated, but it's a sign of a noisy coalition dealing with a crisis, not a collapsing empire. Let's look at where the rubber actually meets the road, the physical security of global trade. Consider the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has threatened to close this choke point, which handles 20% of the world's oil supply. In a fracturing world, that threat would trigger absolute chaos and unilateral panic, with every nation fending for itself. Instead, it has been met with a unified global pushback. The international shipping lanes are being defended collectively. Furthermore, major economies are managing the choke point risks proactively without abandoning the global order. I want to circle back to India's maneuver to secure that 30-day U.S. waiver to buy Russian oil.
Yeah.
It shows incredible flexibility within the system. The U.S. is allowing a strategic exception to its own sanctions to ensure that an emerging global power like India doesn't face an energy crisis. This is a highly sophisticated, adaptive system at work. It bends, it negotiates, it issues waivers, but it does not break.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the profound moral and geopolitical fallout that is occurring simultaneously? The flexibility you're praising in the energy sector is utterly eclipsed by the erosion of Western soft power, which is exactly what's pushing the global South away permanently. We have to look at the human cost and how the rest of the planet views this campaign. The Pentagon recently gutted its civilian watchdogs, cutting the oversight offices responsible for scrutinizing civilian casualties from 200 personnel down to fewer than 40. And the horrific result of that lack of oversight is plain to see: a U.S.-linked Tomahawk missile strike on a girls' school in Menopause that killed roughly 170 children.
That is an undeniable tragedy, and any loss of life on that scale requires rigorous, transparent investigation.
It requires an investigation, yes, but geopolitically it acts as an accelerant. You cannot expect the Global South to remain tethered to a system that produces and then obfuscates that level of tragedy. The African Union is issuing dire warnings right now that this conflict will devastate economies across the continent, from Congo to South Africa to Kenya, due to the resulting energy inflation. This combination of moral outrage and economic pain is exactly what is driving the BRICS nations to build an alternative architecture. When Brazil and South Africa discuss defense cooperation to prevent foreign intervention, they are reacting directly to what happened in Menopause. They're looking at the current global order and deciding that its moral and economic costs are simply too high to bear.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because from a macroeconomic and planetary geopolitical perspective, we have to separate the tragic consequences of kinetic warfare from the structural integrity of the global financial system. The thesis that the Global South is permanently decoupling requires evidence of a viable operational alternative. While BRICS nations may hold summits and express mutual defense aspirations, the hard economic data tells a different story entirely. The US dollar remains the undisputed reserve currency. The very fact that India still required a US waiver to purchase Russian oil demonstrates exactly where the ultimate financial and legal authority resides. If the multipolar alternative were truly ready, India wouldn't need Washington's permission to buy energy. The global system is undoubtedly undergoing a severe stress test, I grant you that. But the coordinated release of global reserves, the strategic use of sanctions waivers, and the massive continued foreign investment into the West, like that $300 billion refinery in Texas, prove that the established order can adapt to and absorb these massive shocks.
I understand why you focus on the dollar and current investment flows, but you're looking at lagging indicators. The shift toward a multipolar world doesn't happen overnight. It happens exactly through the kind of strategic realignment we're witnessing today. You brought up India needing a waiver. The fact that India needed a waiver this time is precisely the catalyst that will ensure they build systems where they don't need one next time. It's permission today, but it's a profound wake-up call for New Delhi tomorrow. Temporary market interventions, like draining strategic petroleum reserves, cannot mask the long-term reality. The West is suffering heavy, irreversible industrial losses. When we talk about 50,000 lost jobs at VW or the doubling of gas prices in Germany, we are talking about the hollowing out of Europe's industrial capacity. The Global South, led by the BRICS nations, is fundamentally reorganizing its energy flows and defense structures away from U.S. influence.
China's acceleration of the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline is a physical multi-billion-dollar manifestation of this decoupling.
They are laying the steel for a new world order. The outrage over civilian casualties and the economic outrage over imported inflation are fusing together, creating a unified bloc of nations committed to ensuring they're never again vulnerable to Western military or economic dictates.
It's clear we're looking at the same planetary crisis and drawing fundamentally different conclusions about the durability of the institutions managing it. But I think there's a crucial point of convergence between our perspectives. We both acknowledge that this conflict has definitively transformed global supply chains, whether it's Germany dealing with doubled natural gas prices or China accelerating overland pipelines to bypass the oceans. Every nation on Earth has been forced to rapidly reevaluate its baseline energy security.
I completely agree. The era of taking frictionless global trade for granted is over. The vulnerability of maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz has been laid bare, and no major economy, whether aligned with the West or the global South, will allow themselves to remain this exposed to a single point of failure in the future.
And this highlights the absolute necessity of intellectual charity when analyzing global events. We have to look at this crisis from a truly planetary perspective. To grasp the full picture, we have to understand both the immense adaptive power of established markets and Western institutions, as well as the undeniable momentum of emerging alliances in the global South.
Exactly. Dismissing the resilience of the U.S.-led system ignores the complex financial architecture that currently sustains global trade. Just as dismissing the BRICS nations as mere rhetoric ignores the very real physical infrastructure they're building to bypass that same system. There is so much more to explore in the geopolitical shifts we've discussed today, from the shifting policies in Asia to the internal debates fracturing European capitals.
Indeed. The landscape is shifting rapidly, and our understanding of it must continually evolve. We'll leave it to our listeners to weigh the evidence and form their own conclusions on where this planetary realignment is ultimately heading. Thank you for joining us for the debate.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.